Airplanes are supposed to be neutral places, narrow corridors of shared air where status dissolves at 30,000 feet and everyone is subject to the same rules. On this particular morning, however, the tragedy cracked the moment a well-dressed businessman settled into a wide leather seat in the first-class cabin and glanced sideways at the man beside him. The cabin hummed softly, overhead bins closing with dull thuds, flight attendants moving with practiced calm. Outside the oval window, the runway shimmered with heat. Inside, something ugly was about to surface. The man in the aisle seat wore a tailored navy suit and an expensive watch that caught the light each time he adjusted his cuff. His hair was silver, his posture confident, his voice already used to being obeyed. When he noticed the passenger by the window, his expression tightened. The other man was black, dressed simply in a clean jacket and jeans, his hands folded patiently as he looked out at the wing. He had boarded quietly, presented his ticket without fuss, and taken his assigned seat. Nothing about him suggested disruption. Yet the businessman leaned closer, lips curling. "Hey, poor, get out," he snapped, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You don't belong here." The words cut through the cabin like sudden turbulence. Conversations stalled. A flight attendant paused mid-step. A few passengers pretended not to notice, eyes fixed on phones or safety cards. Others glanced over, curiosity wrestling with discomfort. The black man turned slowly, surprise flashing across his face before settling into calm restraint. He took a breath, as if weighing the value of responding. "I believe you're mistaken," he said evenly. "This is my seat." The businessman scoffed. "I fly first class every week. People like you sit in the back. Do everyone a favor and move before security has to." A young woman across the aisle winced. A middle-aged man a row behind shifted uneasily. No one intervened. The silence felt heavy, complicit. The black man reached into his pocket and pulled out his boarding pass, holding it up without shaking. "Seat 2A, he said. "Same as the ticket says." The businessman waved it away. "Tickets can be bought. Class cannot." For a moment, it seemed the confrontation might end there, dissolving into the usual awkwardness of air travel. Then a flight attendant approached, her smile polite but strained. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" "Yes," the businessman said immediately, gesturing dismissively. "This man is in the wrong cabin." The attendant glanced at the boarding pass, then at the manifest on her tablet. "Sir," she said to the black passenger, "your seat is correct. Everything is in order." The businessman's face reddened. "This is ridiculous. I paid for peace and quiet, not this." The attendant straightened. "We expect all passengers to treat one another with respect." The businessman leaned back, crossing his arms, but he did not apologize. The attendant moved on, and the engines roared to life. As the plane taxied, the black man stared out the window again, jaw tight, eyes reflecting something deeper than irritation. He had endured moments like this before. Each time, it took something from him. After takeoff, the cabin settled into routine. Drinks were served, laptops opened. The businessman accepted a glass of champagne and smirked, as if the matter were settled. But whispers traveled faster than the beverage cart. Someone had recorded the exchange. Another passenger quietly messaged a friend. Judgment flowed in every direction, though little of it was spoken aloud. An hour into the flight, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brief announcement. A representative from the airline will be speaking with us shortly." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. The businessman frowned, annoyed at the interruption. Moments later, a man in a crisp airline blazer stepped forward, accompanied by a senior flight attendant. He addressed the cabin calmly, eyes scanning faces before settling on the first-class row. "We strive to make every flight safe and welcoming," he said. "Behavior that violates our code of conduct is taken seriously." The businessman stiffened. "Is this about earlier? Because I was the one inconvenienced?" The representative met his gaze. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass?" Reluctantly, the businessman handed it over. The representative examined it, then turned to the black man. "And yours, please." The black man passed his ticket without comment. The representative compared them, nodded, then spoke clearly enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "Both tickets are valid. However, we have reviewed the incident reported by multiple witnesses. The businessman scoffed again. Witnesses to what? Me telling the truth. To harassment, the representative replied. Discriminatory language in attempts to intimidate another passenger. A hush fell. The businessman's confidence faltered. This is absurd, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier edge. The representative continued. Our policy allows us to reassign seats or remove passengers who violate conduct standards. Given the circumstances, we will be taking action. The businessman laughed nervously. You can't be serious. I am, the representative said. Sir, we will be relocating you to an available seat in the main cabin. Color drained from the businessman's face. You can't do that. I paid for this seat, and we will refund the difference, the representative replied. But you will not remain here. Nearby passengers exchanged looks. The businessman sputtered, rising halfway from his seat. This is outrageous. Do you know who I am? The black man finally spoke again, his voice quiet but firm. Apparently not someone above the rules. A few passengers gasped, others smiled despite themselves. The representative gestured down the aisle. Sir, please gather your belongings. Security was not needed. The businessman, humiliated, collected his briefcase and jacket under the watchful eyes of those he had tried to dominate. As he was escorted toward the box, whispers followed him, no longer sympathetic. Once he was gone, the cabin exhaled. The representative turned to the black man. We apologize for what you experienced. If there is anything we can do to make your flight more comfortable, please let us know. Thank you, the man replied. I appreciate that. The representative left, and the flight resumed its rhythm. A flight attendant offered the black man a complimentary drink. A woman across the aisle leaned over and murmured an apology for not speaking up sooner. He nodded, accepting it with grace, though the weight of the moment lingered. As the plane cruised above the clouds, sunlight pouring through the windows, the image of the businessman's earlier arrogance felt distant, diminished. Status had not protected him. Money had not excused cruelty. In a confined space where rules mattered more than ego, his behavior had caught up with him swiftly. When the plane landed hours later, passengers stood and gathered their bags. The black man waited his turn, unhurried. As he stepped into the aisle, several people met his eyes and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity. It was not justice in any grand sense, but it was something. Outside the aircraft, the world continued as it always did, imperfect and uneven. Yet for one flight, at least, respect had been enforced, and a lesson delivered at 30,000 feet. Dignity is not determined by seat numbers, and prejudice, when exposed, carries its own consequences. The story did not begin on the plane. Long before the boarding call, the black man had woken before dawn, checked on his sleeping daughter, and brewed coffee strong enough to cut through fatigue. He was traveling for work, a role earned through years of study and persistence, navigating spaces that often questioned his presence. He dressed simply because comfort mattered more than display, and because he had learned that no amount of tailoring could shield him from assumptions. The businessman's morning had been different. He rushed through a penthouse apartment, barking into his phone, complaining about delays and incompetence. Pyre followed him like a scent, reinforced by assistants and subordinates who rarely challenged him. First class had always been his refuge, a place where he expected deference. The sight of someone who did not fit his narrow image of success felt like an intrusion. When their paths crossed in that narrow cabin, years of unexamined bias found an outlet. The businessman believed wealth entitled him to police the space. The black man understood instantly what was happening. He had faced it in boardrooms, hotels, and stores. Each time required a choice: respond and risk escalation, or endure and preserve peace. Neither option was fair. As the flight progressed, the black man reflected on the quiet courage it took to remain composed. Anger simmered beneath his calm, not explosive, but heavy. He wondered about passengers who had looked away, about the cost of their silence. He also noticed those who watched with concern, trapped by uncertainty. He did not resent them individually. Systems taught people to avoid conflict, even when justice demanded it. In the back of the plane, the businessman sat rigidly in a narrower seat, the reality of his demotion pressing in. He stared at the seat back ahead, replaying the moment again and again. He told himself he was wronged, that the airline had overreacted, that society was too sensitive. Yet beneath excuses, discomfort grew. For the first time in years, his authority had failed him publicly. He noticed other passengers glanced his way, some with recognition, others with judgment. The anonymity he usually enjoyed felt different now, stripped of its protection. He ordered a drink, then declined it, appetite gone. The distance between first class and economy, usually symbolic, felt enormous. When the plane touched down, the businessman hurried off, avoiding eye contact. No one stopped him. No lecture followed. The consequence had already landed. He would return to his world, likely unchanged in many ways, but carrying a memory he could not easily erase. The black man lingered near the gate, waiting for his connection. He called his daughter, listened to her excited chatter, and felt his shoulders relax. He did not recount the incident in detail. She did not need to carry that weight. Instead, he reminded her to be kind and brave, lessons learned through experience. For the passengers who witnessed the exchange, the flight became a story they would tell, a moment when rules had been enforced and prejudice challenged. Some remembered it as reassurance. Others examined their reactions, wondering what they might do differently next time. Airplanes would continue to carry strangers together, compressing lives and values into shared journeys. Incidents like this would still occur, because society carried its fractures everywhere. Yet each response mattered. Each correction nudged the balance toward accountability. In the weeks that followed, the airline reviewed its training materials. Using the incident as a case study without names attached, the staff discussed escalation and decisive action. Policies were refined, not from public pressure, but from clarity, empowering fairness. Respect, they agreed, was not a perk, it was a requirement. The black man continued his travels, sometimes in first class, sometimes not, always aware of measuring eyes. He did not carry bitterness, though the memory stayed sharp. He carried resilience instead. He had not been diminished by the insult, nor defined by the sea. His value remained intact. Occasionally, he thought about the businessman, not with anger but curiosity. He wondered whether discomfort might someday give way to reflection. Change rarely arrived at once. It crept in through interruption and consequence. For the woman who stayed silent, the memory became a turning point. Months later, when she witnessed a similar slight in a grocery store, she spoke up. Her voice shook, but it carried. The ripple from one flight extended farther than any of them could measure. Stories like this rarely hold headlines long. They are shared in conversations, in quiet affirmations, in decisions to act differently. They remind people that dignity must be defended not only by those targeted, but by everyone who shares the space. The image of a first-class cabin captured a moment of conflict. What it could not capture was the complexity behind it. Histories, choices made in seconds, aftermaths unfolding long after landing. Within that narrow frame, a simple truth emerged. Power without empathy collapses quickly. Respect, when enforced, has weight. Airplanes will always be strange places, suspended between destinations, mirroring the world below. On that flight, among recycled air and burnt coffee, routine shattered, then reassembled with a small adjustment, a rule applied, a line drawn, a reminder delivered that no one, regardless of wealth or appearance, is entitled to demean another human being. As the cabin doors opened and passengers dispersed, the sky reclaimed its indifference, but something shifted in the lives touched by those words and consequences. The lesson traveled onward, carried not by engines, but by memory.